OSINT exists on every single team. And when you have an instance of every single color, that basically creates transparent. I would say it's part of the transparency. Honestly, the term OSINT, let's face it, those of us in here that do OSINT or are interested in OSINT, we can attribute that to one singular person, right? Michael Basil. He's the reason most of us are doing it. He was a trailblazer for this. But it goes back even further than that. The precursor to the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services, they had the Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service in World War II. And literally, what that was people sitting around watching the news in other places and deriving intelligence from it. What propaganda is being passed? What narrative are they talking about? What is it appears if they are planning? That's what it really boils down to. And then, even before that, the Vikings and other seafaring folks used celestial navigation. Does anyone here know how to use a sextant and all of that fun stuff? Okay, I kind of do a little bit. I've got a nautical almanac at home if that tells you anything, and a copy of Bowditch. But Napoleon read British newspapers. There was OSINT in the Civil War. Section 3B, Germany encouraged their officers to vacation abroad and then subscribe to newspapers, as the Dutch also did. That doesn't sound that different than a lot of the stuff we do today. I mean, who here watches Al Jazeera? TRT? BBC? EIEIO? And then with that, you've got spy versus spy, the CIA and the KGB doing stuff in the Cold War. And then Robert Steele actually coined the term OSINT. Fun fact, in the original Iraq War with Desert Storm, how did the journalists find out that the American military was planning something?
Was that a pizza order?
It was. It's because people at the Pentagon started ordering pizzas every day late at night. And obviously, if you drive by there, you see a bunch of cars or you don't see a bunch of cars. There's a lot more cars than normal. Oh, and there's a Domino's, there's a Pizza Hut. Wow. They're going to be working late. And then what happened? Exactly. Of course, Michael Basil and his entire ecosystem of books, training, resources, tools, all of that. Who here has ever used the Yellow Pages? Exactly. I'm going to tell you, if you're admitting to using the Yellow Pages, you probably need to pop a couple of Advil before bed. Magazines, newspapers, social media. We've got all of that, right? The ability to unmask truths on the world stage. OSINT is global. It is what's happening in the world. I can tell you a Discord right now that you can go to and see what's going on with Israel and Hamas right now. I can tell you a Slack to go to look at stuff going on in Ukraine with Russia right now. It's happening. You've got crowdsourced investigations that are oftentimes for the better. If nothing else, they mean well, but sometimes it's for the worse. Bellingcat coverage of MH17. I will tell you, I block Bellingcat on my home router. I have nothing against Bellingcat. I just value my productivity because if I unblock it and I find myself on Bellingcat's website, there's a whole day of productivity gone. Because I just end up reading their articles and looking at their techniques. Center for Internet Information Resilience, they did Eyes on Russia. You've got the stuff helping Israel right now. Who here has seen the movie Don't F with Cats? You want to know how OSINT works outside of InfoSec? That's exactly it. And then, of course, you've got some of the conspiracy stuff, too. But honestly, we deal with MDM, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. I wish I could say that as an investigator, we don't fall into rabbit holes. But I would be lying, and more than likely, Bugs Bunny would slap me because I've probably fallen in his rabbit hole. He wouldn't even be nice enough to ask, "What's up, Doc?" But anyway, to be successful with it, you have to understand your biases, your beliefs, preconceived notions. Because regardless of whether you want to or not, you have experienced things in your life that will create traumas for you and shape who you are and how you view the world. And as a byproduct, that will create a subconscious bias that inadvertently or on purpose, it will cause you to view things a certain way, which could introduce bias. So there's a certain level of internal social engineering that goes into this, that you have to understand your own biases and account for that and make the conscious efforts to mitigate them. But if you want to make it through MDM, honestly, it's validate, validate, validate. Because when you're talking about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, when you're talking about fake news, all of that fun stuff, a broken clock is right twice a day. There's always a shred of truth in every conspiracy. You have to be able to segregate between the two. And that's where it gets tricky. So if you want to demystify OSINT tools, here's some of my favorites. So honestly, I do a lot of stuff from the CLI. I do a lot of stuff in Linux. I also do a lot of stuff outside the CLI and in Linux, outside of Linux. Well, loosely. I mean, the Mac operating system is built on BSD, so therefore it is kind of Linux-ish. But we won't get into those semantics. But honestly, you've got browsers. If you want to get into OSINT and you're afraid and you're like, I can't write code, I don't do Python, I'm terrified of Linux. I've actually heard someone say, I would love to take your class, but I don't know how to use Linux. Anyway, if you're afraid of that, it's okay. In the past, when I've ran CTF events at conferences as part of an intelligence village, usually somewhere between number 2 and number 4 in the final scoreboard did it via their phone exclusively from a browser. But then you have things like YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, your search engines, right? You've got all sorts of search engines. There are so many search engines out there. You've got things like Yandex, Bing. I mean, we all like to joke about the most Bing for term is Google.com. I mean, is it kind of true? Yes, but Bing is another opinion. It's going to, the algorithm is different. It's going to give you a different insight. You've got things like Metager, you've got Halal Google, you've got Dogpile, you've got Amia, so many things out there. Phone books, mapping products. I mean, you can go and look on Google Earth or Street View or Maps and discern something about an area. I'm personally not a big fan of either of them, but you've got Spiderfoot and Maltego. But the number one most important OSINT tool that you can ever touch, period, point blank, hands down, I will fight you over this, is the human brain. No amount of tooling, coding, AI, EIEIO will augment your ability to connect the proverbial dots. That's just the reality of it. It's a controversial take at times, but it's there. If you like the Linux perspective, you've got things like ReconNG, tools like GitGot, gHunt, Holehe, Migrant, Sherlock, what's my name? My personal favorite, Jupyter Notebooks. I have a lot of fun with Jupyter Notebooks. But factor, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. With OSINT, you have the ability to stare into someone's soul. You have the ability to see their inner workings and learn things about them that they may not even know. When you're writing a report, you don't have to put everything. You don't have to say, Cheryl in accounting's having marital problems and she found out her husband has an account on OnlyFans. You could say, you have some employees in a financial-based department that are suffering from marital issues that could impact their ability to perform their job. You're not pointing it out that it's Cheryl. People in the company probably already know, but you're not memorializing it. That's what it boils down to. It's called OSINT, not DocSINT. You don't have to collect everything about everyone and keep it forever. There are times that it makes sense to collect a lot of stuff. There are times that exercising restraint is better. You should value your own privacy. The two most sacred pieces of software, in my opinion, password managers and VPNs. I had someone hit me on LinkedIn the other day. Hey, take a look at this VPN thing. it uses iMessage and TCP. And I'm like, what encryption? He's like, it's a proxy. I'm like, but you called it a VPN. You keep saying this word, but I don't think you know what it means. He said I was debating semantics. I was like, and he misspelled it too. I was like, who said anything about malware protection? Okay. I was like, I'm on a Mac, but I do still use malware protection for anyone wondering. But with that, you've got to value your own privacy as well. Encryption is good. It is definitely good to use, but not all algorithms are created equally. When you do your investigations, your lawyer, well, your client will thank you for it. And if you find yourself in hot water, your lawyer will thank you for it. And you will then thank your lawyer with a nice check to the lawyer after you don't get in a bunch of trouble. Because in this, when you're collecting things, because of the globalism of OSINT, you have the ability to collect things about people in, I don't know, the European Union. What about that pesky GDPR? If you're found to be negligent, they can, within reason, fine you up to 4% of your global annual revenue. I don't know about you, but I'm not really looking at sharing. I would rather just spend a little bit of time encrypting something and, I don't know, taking it off a network and not having it hanging out on like Pastebin so that I don't have to worry about paying that stuff. But, you know, it happens. OSINT's strategies. Critical thinking is paramount. There are some times, and I'm sure if you go over to the TraceLabs booth and talk to Baloo, he can attest to this. There are times I have dislocated my shoulder with some of the reaches I have submitted in missing person CTFs. I'm like, ah. But you know what? Oftentimes they are correct. Not every time, but a lot of times they are. You have to think critically. You have to think outside the box. Taking good notes is paramount, whether that be paper-based notes, voice-based notes, whether you use something like Obsidian, Standard Notes, Cherry Tree, whatever. It doesn't matter. But keep good notes. Ask a lot of questions because it's not what you ask, but how you ask it. You have to say, I'm investigating this business that we believe to be doing fraudulent transactions. If I were a business doing fraudulent transactions, how would I try to cover this up? I'm looking for a missing person. This missing person does not want to be found. If I did not want to be found, what would I do? And you can't think of that as the privacy nut. You have to think of it as a normal, right? As the lay people out in town. What would they do? Probably change their name on Facebook. That's probably number one. They're not going to change their username, just their display name. That's it. So all username tools are still fair game. But you've got to do that. Know your own capabilities. There's a thing, and I'm going to sanitize the terminology that I've heard this called. But in the Navy, we had what we called the waterhead theory, right? You have people who are waterheads and people who are not. You have the people who know they are and who think they are not. The most dangerous person is a person who's a waterhead and thinks they're not. The best people to work with were people who were waterheads and knew they were waterheads, right? Because they're more cautious. What I'm getting at is know your own capabilities. Know what you are capable of. Know what you are comfortable with. Push your limits. You have to keep learning, but know your capabilities. Don't be afraid, within reason, to say, hey, you know what? I need to bring someone else who knows this better than I do. For example, when competing in the TraceLabs events 3 years ago, the first time we won at DEFCON, every time we saw a picture of a cell phone, we passed that picture to Ginsburg. Why? Because he was exceptional at running reverse image searches to determine exactly what kind of cell phone that was. I will tell you, when I'm doing like those CTFs and I see a picture of a person, it's always who I think it is. If I see 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, yep, this is the person. I mean, I suck at identifying people's facial features. I just do. That's my own capability. So when I've competed in the past, I'm like, hey, I need somebody to take a look at this. And they're like, no, Joe, this first person was bald-headed and had eyebrows. This person doesn't have eyebrows and like has hair down to their knees. I'm like, oh, well, their face looked the same. No, it didn't. Yeah, it did. But anyway, but you also need to familiarize yourself with a myriad of search engines. I know there's a lot of people that are anti-Google. There's a lot of people who are pro DuckDuckGo. I'm actually pro Google and mostly anti DuckDuckGo. If I wanted to get my search results from Bing, I would just go to Bing. A company that wants to pay to license a Sting and the Police song and act like they're doing something out of the goodness of their heart and they can't be transparent about their monetization model, I have a problem with that. But then again, if I wanted the results, I would just go to Bing. Get it from the horse's mouth. But know those. If you're looking for someone in, say, Korea, look at Naver. If you're looking for someone in Russia, you've got Sputnik, you've got Baidu and Soso in China. You want to look at regional and frequently used search engines. Familiarize yourself with them. And the good thing is, search engines are free. Like, it works. I mean, future trends, it's hard to say for certain. We've got a lot of things complicating everything right now. You've got generative AI. Generative AI is a blessing and a curse. I will be absolutely transparent with you. ChatGPT wrote this talk. Kind of. The actual body, I wrote. The title slides, ChatGPT wrote. So I had it write all that stuff and then I filled in the blanks. But that keeps me from presenting the same old everywhere. I say, hey, give me a Dr. Seuss themed OSINT talk. If you want to see that talk, it's called Oh, the OSINT You Can Do. And I went through all the titles, I filled in the blanks, and at the very end, I read it off. And it's like, you know, I didn't even see that coming. But generative AI can be good. I'm using it to maintain a SOC account right now. I'm building a SOC account from scratch, and I don't want to have to familiarize myself too much with inner workings of a particular group. So I'm just going to ChatGPT's playground. And there's a reason I say this. Regular ChatGPT will not let me write politically charged posts. Well, it won't do it for me. ChatGPT playground will. You heard it here first. Maybe not first, but you heard it here authoritatively, right? It's what I'm doing. I just have it write the post, and then I take all the emojis out. Even though I've told it, don't do emojis, it does emojis. Has a mind of its own. You can't take some people anywhere. You've got deep fakes, right? With that, you've got the botnets. And it's not just necessarily like the DDoS bots. You've got armies of bots that are controlling trends on social media. Those bots are almost as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than DDoS bots, depending on your threat model and the organization and what is actually at stake. I mean, from a U.S. federal government perspective, I would venture to say that a disinformation botnet is more dangerous than a DDoS bot, because we've already got a DDoS bot because we've not had a Speaker of the House in 17 days. I mean, is that what my first supervisor in industry would call a SIDOS? Yes, a self-induced denial of service. But that's what it is. You've got biased platforms. I mean, part of the problem we have in the world today is people no longer want respectful discourse. They want to hear their ideas come out of someone else's mouth. And with the ease of creating a social media platform, anybody can create one and have it stood up and start just spewing whatever they want. If you want a case in point, Mike Lindell has a social media platform that is called Frank. I'm not on it yet, but it's there. But there are biased platforms with that. I mean, on the same token, Facebook and the more mainstream platforms got a little bit too, we'll say, I'm going to use the term conservative, but I'm using it as an oxymoron with their moderation of certain narratives during the pandemic. They got over aggressive with what they were moderating and fact checking. So that's biased the other way. I mean, changes to terms of service. Monetization models are going to change, and they're going to change the terms of service as a byproduct. The platforms themselves are going to change. And then you've got pesky things like CCPA, GDPR, and COPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. that changes what can be on the social media platform and what they are allowed to collect and disseminate. So you have all of these things to contend with. And if I had a crystal ball, I would be more than happy to tell you this stuff. But these are things that are on the cusp. These are things that can be problematic or they can be plentiful. It all depends on what you are doing with it. So if you want to do some reading on things to get better with OSINT, don't be like me and block Bellingcat. Go to Bellingcat's website, spend some time, familiarize yourself, read up on MH17, the Malaysia air flight that was allegedly shot down by Russia. And I probably could have omitted one word there. If you watch Letterkenny, you probably know which one it was. But TraceLabs, if you've not registered for the CTF, it starts right after this talk. Do it. From what I hear, there are only 40 competitors right now, so you have a strong chance of winning. You've got case scenarios as well. And I put a star next to case scenarios because it's also an OSINT training platform where I do instructor-led, classroom-based training. Their stuff is all immersive scenarios. That's all it is. Their most expensive scenario is $50. It's good stuff. And it's created by Ray Baker and Zewin. And if you're on InfoSec Twitter or any of the bird site alternatives or Discords, those are two names that probably ring a bell. With Discords, you know, I have the OSINTion Discord. TraceLabs has one. Bellingcat has one. Case has one. Overt Operator, that's a good one. Project Owl, that's another good one. But these are all places where you can talk to like-minded people, bounce ideas off of them, find ways to collaborate, and just basically enhance your understanding. People like those of us who create videos and blogs and stuff, we create it and then boom, we share it. And then people can read it and provide whatever feedback they may have. So it's well worth it to be in those. You will get a bit of Discord overload. I'm not going to lie. And then if you get into Michael Basil's ecosystem, all of his stuff is on Element. So you've got that too. But, you know, you also have to factor in that you're going to have different categories for different data. And with these categories, this is kind of based on your role and the way that what you are going to find to be important and the ways you are or are not allowed to capture, collect, and analyze. So public versus private sector, there are things that you can do working for the government, and there are things you cannot do. There are things that you cannot do if you don't work for the government. But that's something you have to be aware of. Are you doing this from an offensive mindset or a defensive mindset? Which, if you want to go red versus blue, which team are you on today? And just because you're on the red team today, don't mean you're not going to be on the blue team tomorrow. It's just the reality. Are you doing this from a perspective of IT and InfoSec, or are you doing this more investigatively? Is this journalism, right? You've got things like, I mean, Micah Lee does stuff. Teddy Wilson does stuff. To a degree, Benjamin Strick does stuff. Bellingcat, that's what it is. It's, to a degree, investigative journalism. Monica Camacho, she does this stuff as well. Fraud investigations. I mean, if you claim that you broke your arm and then you take 6 weeks off work and decide you're going to get on a ladder and paint your house, don't be surprised when the insurance adjuster and their fraud team flies a drone over your backyard and catches you. I mean, that's not really OSINT, but don't be surprised when they fly a digital drone over your proverbial backyard, right? And then, of course, law enforcement. And then even with that, you've also got private investigators. For example, in my state, I am not a licensed private investigator. Why? Because there are certain laws that are that private investigators are subjected to that would restrict my ability to collect the way that I normally collect. And because I don't do a lot of expert witness stuff, at least in my state, I have no true advantage to getting the license. If I need to do something with a private investigator, I'm the only person within a 3-hour radius that can issue CPEs to private investigators. So if I need to call in a favor, it's like, hey, you remember those CPEs I hooked you up with? I need a PI. I need access to this database. Can you do this query for me? Oh, thanks. Oh, yeah. And then the next time they need someone to do like the digital stuff, my phone rings and it's mutually beneficial. But in some states, it's different. 41 states requires a private investigator license if you're doing that. Of the 9 that don't, some cities, counties, townships, etc., require a license. In some places, the license is nothing more than a business license. Sometimes you have to take a test, sometimes you don't. It varies. If you're interested in the private investigating thing, though, you should read The Complete Idiot's Guide to Private Investigating. I say that, it sounds tongue-in-cheek, but 32 states use that as the source material for their private investigator exam. So when somebody's like, hey, if you want to be a private investigator, hey, read this book, I'm like, I was born in the night, but not last night. They're like, no, for real. And I searched it. I was like, oh, you're not kidding. Wow. But, to that end, you want to harness social media. This is the crucial battlefield. Here's what it boils down to. So you can do an API. You can get access to an API. That's a user-based API. Show of hands, who's heard of a Firehose API? Firehose APIs are prohibitively expensive. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars per month. Anyone can get access to them, but not everyone has that kind of fundage. I don't have that kind of fundage. So I consider that to be more closed source. Also, warrants, subpoenas, national security letters, stuff extracted from the back end, stuff that would never be displayed on the platform. What IP address was this person logging in as? That's social media intelligence, but it is not OSINT because you have to have the warrant, subpoena, etc. to get it. But social media itself, it's always a moving target, right? A year ago, we could have been talking about Parlay. Parlay's down right now. Will it come back? Probably. I mean, all 10 employees claim to be software developers. But if it doesn't, I will probably sleep just as good as I will if it don't, or if it does. There's more than enough social media out there. But honestly, it is difficult to maintain enough SOC accounts and get them into the right places. That's something I'm battling right now. I have a second phone. I have all the apps for all the stuff I need, and just posting as them, like even somewhat daily, becomes arduous without just copying and pasting. Platform. You got to mix it up a little bit. But that's something that is problematic. But, your own OPSEC and your biases are going to play into this. And like I said, ChatGPT Playground, it is your friend. So with this, you're getting paid for insight. You're not getting paid to write a 500-page report. It's not a doctoral dissertation. The techniques and the sources are secondary. You are ultimately assisting with decision-making. Think about the enrichment from data to information to intelligence. With ChatGPT, I love it. Use it at your social media post. Use it to make backstories. You create a LinkedIn account. I mean, I did a webinar of this. Create a LinkedIn bio for Helen Johnson sales professional. Cool. Seems legit. Works. Go over to ChatGPT Dolly, Helen Johnson sales professional. Find the one that looks the most real, that doesn't have like hallucinations or like 17 fingers. But there are a lot of hallucinations. Be aware of that. With the geospatial perspective, it amplifies the story, but you don't want to do it in an illogical manner. You're not trying to drive that page count up. You want to make sure there's enough contrast in the image that people can make sense of it. Make sure that the narrative, the written narrative, corroborates the geospatial. And I mean, this might be a kind of a duh thing to say, but clearly label things. Readability counts. Follow the money. I mean, this applies to ransomware. It applies to organized crime. It applies to trafficking. It's there. Financial intelligence, whether it be fiat or cryptocurrency, it is paramount. And honestly, financial intelligence can often tell us the stories that words cannot easily describe. If you can pinpoint this crypto address communicated with this crypto address, and this, you can unravel a lot of stuff. When you talk about the tightrope, I mean, honestly, it's a legal circus. And all the things that I mentioned before, military, law enforcement, an attorney, a PI, if you're dealing with the EU, Brazil, California, or several other places, and then people under the age of 13. At the end of the day, I am not a lawyer, but like I said yesterday, I did stay in a Holiday Inn last night. Check with an attorney. Fake news is everywhere. It's in politics, it's in true crime, it's in day-to-day things. Ask me no questions, I will tell you no lies. There's a good chance that if you read something on my social media that was not me announcing an upcoming course, it's probably peppered with some disinformation. There's some truth to it, but it's peppered a bit. I mean, even health issues. I mean, look at what happened with the terms ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. That was a whole monster in itself in 2020 and 2021 with true crime. Did anyone in here do any investigation for the Gabby Petito case? I had people reaching out, hey, what about this technique? What about this technique? I looked on TikTok and there were so many people manufacturing intelligence because they are so desperate to go viral, to become an influencer, to get likes. It made me sick. And I was like, I can't. My eye is twitching. I just can't. No. So you have that in the true crime world as well. And then you have people that don't understand the rules to play by. We saw this with hashtag save the children or hashtag save our children. They were just creating Facebook groups all willy-nilly, and they were basically executing political hits on people. It's like, oh, this person here. I mean, the whole Pizzagate thing. Same thing. You can unravel the network, but you have to be able to discern what is MDM. Is a hammer a tool or a weapon? And honestly, answering on behalf of myself, it depends. Am I trying to hang a picture up, or are you breaking into my house in the middle of the night without me being within proximity to get my shotgun? Because I do have claw hammers hidden throughout my house. I am a little paranoid. TSA confiscated my tinfoil fedora. That security theater, I tell you. But OSINT is the same. It can be used for good or evil. Respect the subjects of your investigations. You don't have to have everything in the report, like I said earlier. Be careful in what and how you gather your intelligence. You may leave traces behind that could paint a target on your back. You don't want that. Be even more careful about how and where you store what you collect. Collaborative things. If you want to get into collaborative things, you've got TraceLabs. You've got Anti-Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. They run a dark webathon. It primarily focuses on cryptocurrency, but you do see some other stuff. If you've done a few TraceLabs events, you might enjoy the Skull Games. You have to undergo a background investigation of that, and you actively go looking for trafficking victims. I'm going to be honest, you're going to see some stuff. And then you've got Operation Safe Escape. They seek to help domestic violence victims get out and stay out. But, shifting gears a bit here. When we talk about IoT, Shodan. Who knew that Shodan's last name was Brady and Shodan's middle name was Marsha? But anyway, you've got that. I mean, how many times have you just been Googling stuff or hanging out on the Google hacking database and found default credentials? Default credentials that worked. Although, I'm not a lawyer, but you probably don't want to test to see if they work, because if you test to see if they work, you could technically be in violation of CFAA. So if you test to see if they work, I did not tell you to test. In fact, I told you not to test. The default directories. I mean, you've got all of that. I mean, there's a recurring theme here of the defaultness, right? Default subdomains, poor naming in subdomains. You probably don't, if you're going to set up a honeypot, you probably want to call it like crownjewels.yourdomain.tld, because someone's probably going to come snooping. In fact, I guarantee you someone's going to come snooping. How much snooping they do, I don't know. But you've got dorking and the equivalent as well. I'm going to preface this with the next slide has a selfie on it. Yep, I know. But you need to employ your OPSEC. Like I said, VPN and password manager, have some form of malware protection. Ideally, I hate to say this, but ideally everything on here you should be paying for. Because if you're not paying for the product, typically you are the product. But malware protection, yeah. Translation tools, whether you use something like DeepL or Google Translate or Yandex, it doesn't matter. Have a pie hole, because, I mean, your VPN can accomplish that as well. Like if you use Proton, the secure core will do that. But having that second layer of security is good as well. Optimally, you should do your investigations off a sterile system. You should look at things like browser isolation with things like WebGap. Consider cloud architecture. I like using cloud architecture for investigations because if I do something stupid or I get a little too aggressive, it's a cloud IP address that gets banned, not my home IP address or my VPN IP address. And truth be told, a lot of times your VPN IP address is already going to be blocked because somebody had to screw it up. But here are some use cases of how we may use OSINT within InfoSec. Threat intelligence. I mean, is it really any different? Let me practice my Russian here for a second. Нет. Do you hear that, Duolingo? I need some points. Anyway, reverse engineering. There are trends that you could actually find when you're decompiling things or finding heuristic signatures within malware that you're looking at that you can attribute. I mean, how many times have the Russians got caught because they left their comments written in Russian? At least they're following, I'm going to assume it might be OWASP criteria to put comments in their code. I don't know. Red teaming, purple teaming, pen testing. Honestly, in hiring folks, I wish more people in the hiring world used OSINT. That way I would get fewer unsolicited LinkedIn requests for like AppSec positions because I don't AppSec. I barely even app. I mean, when I write code, especially like in Python, it's not the most efficient, it's not pretty, but eventually it works. That's what it is. Connecting on LinkedIn. I have an eyeball emoji before my name on LinkedIn. Why? So I can detect idiots using automation. When I get a message to Eyeballs Joe, I'm like, block. I wish more salespeople would use it. Because also on my LinkedIn, I say, I am not a decision maker. I am not open to a cold sales pitch. Oh, sales pitch? Bye-bye. Block. I used to argue with them. I found a lot more inner zen by just blocking. Makes me feel better. If you want to play with software and platforms, you've got things like TraceLabs Kali. I mean, TraceLabs has their own fork of Kali. You've got CSI Linux. Michael Basil has custom scripts that you can use. Some of my Raspberry Pis are running TraceLabs Kali. Some are running Linux with the TraceLabs Kali packages installed on top of it, with Michael Basil scripts installed on top of that. It's all there. But honestly, a browser, Recon NG, Cherry Tree, Obsidian, Standard Notes, something. That's really all you need. You may have saw the Pelican case I took to the workshop yesterday with like the Raspberry Pi, the VPN, all that stuff. It's great, but you don't have to use that. So if you want to get started, start with CTFs, Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, TraceLabs, OSINT Dojo. Absorb all you can. Blogs, podcasts, courses, tutorials, independent study. That's going to take you farther than anything anybody else tells you. You can take a technique that you learned in a blog or a podcast or a YouTube video and then build upon it. That's where the power comes in. Reading the walkthroughs of investigations, like reading DOJ indictments, gives you really good ideas on how the feds use OSINT. So in conclusion, OSINT can be very rewarding. With the good comes the bad. With the bad comes the awful. With the awful comes the worst. But know your limits, adhere to them. Don't be afraid to speak up, step away, or even get help. Because I'll be honest, some of you will do investigations from now until you retire or whatever. Will not see anything too unsavory. Some of you will do 1 or 2 investigations a year and you're going to see the worst of the worst. Just be prepared. You are the best version of you. Don't try to be the second best somebody else, and exercise self-preservation. With that being said, I'm going to open it for questions. I've got a few promotional slides as well. If you're interested in the OSINTion Discord or any of my streaming stuff, we have that. I've got some upcoming classes. In January, I'm going to be teaching primarily via anti-siphon. This is the schedule for that. I'll be teaching 2 courses a month. And then beyond that, here's my socials in the meantime. Yes, what's your question? Malinformation, it's kind of a tuxedo t-shirt between misinformation, disinformation. It's kind of poisoned the well of sorts. It usually has a different motive than misinformation or disinformation. Disinformation is deliberate. Misinformation is often innocent in nature. It could be the source of disinformation. It could be because someone got fed disinformation, but it's usually innocent. Dark web, I've been doing investigations 15 years, and I've went to the dark web for a total of 1 investigation. Honestly, there's a lot of hype, but there's not a lot of reward. Using things like tells, cubes, wannix, there are valid reasons to it, but it doesn't fit everybody's threat model. You don't have to. It can last between 5 minutes and forever. There are some missing people that I have been off and on looking for years. For the TraceLabs event today, you're going to have 4 hours. After that, just walk away. Trust me. Anyone else? Thanks. Have a great day, and see you around.